I think the best way to think about this is in terms of some sort of framework. So essentially, so in Mars, we look at it from an emerge, establish, scale kind of framework, right? So now, for example, for application of Gen AI, so you have in the emerge area, you will have acceleration of key processes, improvements, and single step tasks. In the establish, you'll have augmentation of entire functions by supporting low value tasks, done by most employees. And then automation, you have, or at scale, platform dependent or platform run kind of utilizations. Now, in March specifically, we are seeing a mixture of, the emerge and establish. We are trying to move towards the scale, but the scale is typically more disruptive and is also high risk, right? So the idea is to, it also comes down to different functions. So for example, if we're talking about, knowledge management, it's typically a low risk if we were to do it within, let's say, an HR, or it may become higher risk if we were to do it within legal. But essentially, we are focusing more on the emerge and establish right now. So I think in terms of frameworks, that would be the best way. Now, also, we'll have to look at, cost as a big factor as you kind of go through this, because experiments don't typically give you a good understanding of cost. As we go towards scale, cost is becoming a big factor, which requires LLM ops and with the kind of efficiencies that can bring to the table.
And what about data?
Right. So, yeah, I think one of the bigger things this has uncovered is, the importance of the quality of data. So now, while Gen AI is extremely exciting, I think it can only reach its true potential when, we have good quality data available. And for that, you need, obviously, as all of us know on the call, it requires a certain level of maturity for the org. So we have embarked on this journey of creating a connected data foundation, again, partnership with Tiger here, where the idea is to kind of be able to stitch a huge number of data sources and data sets together in a manner that will allow us to then, utilize the data for several applications, Gen AI being one of them. Now, this is obviously a multi-year journey that propels us in terms of maturity, data maturity. So there are a lot of elements to it, but we have been making good progress so far.
Fantastic. In fact, I just second that thing on establishing a proper data foundation and data strategy. Over the last few months, we have started multiple across industries now exercises of getting back to basics of data strategy, saying how are you going to deal with the data so that organizations can leverage the data effectively for AI, right? Thanks for that, Shashank. Rowan, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to initially echo what you both were saying around the importance of the underlying data being a key contributor to actually producing really interesting and differentiated capabilities with AI applications. So the folks that we've seen able to move to production with generative AI applications in 2023 were generally the folks who had a very strong data and machine learning practice that was underlying their overall organization. So, they were prepared to actually reference the correct information to build, very quality applications. And on that note, one of the most common patterns that I'm seeing in terms of technical architectures for generative AI applications today is retrieval augmented generation, which I'm guessing many of our listeners have heard of. And if you haven't, essentially it's the architecture that I showed in my slide presentation, where you have a query that comes in, you, at the very basic level, extract content that you have put into a vector database, you give it back to the model, and then it synthesizes an answer for you. And one of the reasons that we're seeing this emerge as one of the key architectures, or key architectural approaches, I would say almost a best practice at this point in time, is because it's a very good way of grounding the model around a specific set of data so that it doesn't generate as many hallucinations, and so that you can control that coherent nonsense that it's generating in various ways. You can use, further focusing of the prompts by using prompt engineering. You can use approaches to analyze the output, as I was referencing in my presentation as well, to do things like create citations around the content that is actually being referenced in the generated answer. So to greater or lesser degrees, whoever is using that information is able to trace it back to the information source. And so that's really one of the main approaches that we're seeing to these applications. And there's various different flavors of that and different approaches. There's all kinds of different stuff that folks are starting to do in terms of actually creating the prompt itself by enriching it with information coming from, say, a predictive model. So you have a customer that comes into the website. You might use your segmentation model to identify what segment that customer falls into, pass that segment as a piece of information as you're in the query to the large language model, which then helps further ground the behavior. So even when we're kind of in this retrieval augmented generation approach, we can see how predictive AI and generative AI can kind of come together to build a full end-to-end application. Now, one of the other aspects kind of on the user side that I'll quickly touch on is the need and demand for simulation and testing tools when using these models. So one of the big challenges that folks are trying to overcome is how do we actually deal with the extreme variety of large language models, for one, and then all the other generative models that exist out there in the world, and how to assess them against each other. So we're seeing various different types of studios, libraries, orchestration tools for large language models to understand how they behave. And this is a bit distinct from the LLM ops, which I think we'll talk about a bit later on, but it's also distinct because at this point we're talking about the creation and let's say application training stage of the model, not the actual model in production.
Awesome. SRIRAM?
No, I think both Shashank and Rowan have covered a lot of key aspects in terms of patterns that we are seeing, right? So whether it's around data quality, the RAG approach, as well as enabling traceability and auditability. What we see is prompting is obviously underneath all the patterns that we see, whether it's through copilots that are integrated with enterprise software, whether it is with the RAG approach, or we're also seeing fair degree of fine-tuning, right? In industries where there are specific nuances to their data, to the way the language needs to be rendered. Like, for example, we're working on generating clinical trial reports. So fair degree of fine-tuning based approaches are also being come across various industries. And then all of this is getting wrapped in some sort of an application, right? So at the end of the day, Gen AI is being wrapped as an application for enterprises. So there is an whole application part to the patterns that we see. And behind the scenes, it could be a copilot, it could be a retrieval augmented generation, it could be fine-tuning, or it could be some combination of all of these. And that's the way it is evolving. Still a lot of things to be figured out as newer models, newer patterns are emerging. And to Rowan's point earlier, there are newer orchestration tools, newer ways the entire solution is getting stitched together. But these are some common themes we see today across most of our implementations.